You've been gone a long time. Where did you go?
Hey, welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. And I've got some special guests here. My buddies from the Spinner Rack. This guy right here we don't care about. This is Petey. Petey handles all of the light work. He's the guy who makes all of the magic happen on all the videos. Really happy to have him here. And of course, Mario, who's the biggest Batman fan, but we still have him here anyway, even though we're talking about the greatest Superman stories ever told. We're doing our top 5. So, guys, what's your top 5?
I'll start off right now. I'll tell you right now what's my number 1, not even the top 5. The number 1 Superman story ever done. Ever done was the death of Superman.
Oh, okay.
What did you like about the story?
He
It
died,
wasn't
right?
that good, but, Superman died.
Okay.
It showed the invincibility of the invincibility, the aura of invincibility has been destroyed. This fake alien from outer space who came down to Earth and tried to overpower us humans, human beings, was destroyed and taken out of us.
Okay, Lex. That's also one of my favorite stories, but there's a lot of stuff going on. It's just not that particular issue. The whole death and return of Superman, I thought was a really good story.
The
It
resurrection of Superman, you mean? The resurrection of Jesus Christ? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about Superman?
I don't blaspheme, so I'm talking strictly about Superman.
I'm just saying that they were pushing that whole resurrection thing. I was like, hey,
Oh,
are we
please, they
talking
did the
about
same
Superman?
thing with Batman. They did the same thing. He gets
But
Batman rises. What happens?
So
He's
what-
broken. Okay, his back is broken, and then he has to do the same thing. He has to rise again. The same thing.
This is a Superman show. I thought we were talking about Superman.
Hey.
Why are we bringing up Batman? I'm saying you asked a simple question. What's the best Superman stories around?
It's a
And I-
regular, repeated motif, okay? It's not limited to Jesus, Superman, or anything else of that nature. They all do it, okay? You can put a Christ figure just about anywhere that you want. Good. But that story right over there I thought was very good. Hadn't been done before. And the biggest thing was, especially since Crisis was still relatively, still recent. So only 6 years before. And what it really did was to reestablish why Superman was important to the DC Universe and the players in the DC Universe. That fight between Doomsday, no. I didn't really care for it that much when it first came out. I hated the fact that he beat him with this double-handed thing, because I was like, you get less power this way. Technically, I was just like, no, I wasn't for it. And I kept asking all these questions like, hey, why don't you use super speed? Why don't you fly?
Any of his other powers.
Why don't you do this stuff? But I guess, he has to, whatever it is, he has to go toe-to-toe with them. But the overall story, the death and the return, the reign of the Superman, that was a very well-written. And I don't think a lot of people understand, because it was 4 different writers, maybe 6 at one point, but definitely 4 writers, and they had to have that story done cohesively, and it all made sense, start to finish, technically solid and strong all the way through. With the exception of that fight, definitely amongst my
But this
top
is the
5.
story when they had Steel take over.
Yeah.
For Superman. It was just
Steel
too
was
many.
one of them.
Yeah, and
Steel
I just thought it was
3
just
others.
too many different things happening, and I felt bad about the whole story because I looked at it again. Resurrection of Superman, Jesus Christ himself coming back, an alien from outer space. If he was going to die, let him stay dead. You know what I'm trying to say? Let's get a whole new
But
take
you
on
just,
Superman.
because you want him dead.
Who said that? No.
No, I think you might want him.
I came to your show with open arms to try to give an opinion. You asked me what's the best Superman story. I give it to you,
So
and you.
I attacked you.
I'm being persecuted. That's what I feel. I'm being persecuted right now.
I think
How about-
set my boundaries.
I think everybody, this is on everybody's top 5, right? Death and Return of Superman, anybody?
I like the stories after the death with the reign of Superman with the 4. I like those stories. More so the Steel ones with, was it John Bogdanove and Louis Simonson. Those ones I sort of liked. I got into that sort of story.
So let's go with one of yours, Pete.
My top Superman story ever is the first story, Action Comics #1. Action Comics #1 has the origin on the first page. As a kid, I loved just not having a full story. It's just like a 1-page origin, just set up everything, explains the whole basis of that. Then it goes right into Superman in action. Like he's, everyone likes to say now it's the common man. He was just very aggressive, just take charge, didn't, just handle things. And then when you get to the Daily Planet, Clark Kent is pretty interesting. He's trying to figure out if anyone knows, and then he's a reporter, they confront him. Have you heard anything about Superman? And I was like, oh, I didn't expect that as a kid. And then when he's with Lois, he's still sort of aggressive, even though he doesn't want to fight. He's trying to court Lois, but when it comes to confrontation, he's like, no, I'm not into confrontation. But he's still, all through the early issues, he's still very interested. But then goes back to Superman again, and he's still fun. He's got someone on the telephone wires, and it's a cliffhanger because he's like, oh, he slipped. Is he gonna fall or whatnot? Now it's not, but he's just having so much fun as Superman. It's just one of my favorite issues.
Wow.
Mario's never read Action Comics 1.
Wow.
Okay, he's never read Action Comics 1, but and Petey's doing a really good amount of that's probably one of the best synopsis/analysis I've seen of Action Comics 1, because most of the guys, all they think about when they think about the Golden Age Superman is that, oh, he was just this rough and tumble guy, he didn't take anybody's crap, and part of it you have to really, he was not a bully. He only went after the people who were the bad guys, and they were wrong. And even then, he usually applied enough force to get the job done without a problem. What I liked about that issue is there's so much of the character that's still integral to the character today, and that's done very early on, where he's just in motion when he starts. He's got this woman slung over him. He's like, hey, what's this guy come from? Who's that woman? Looks good. When they drops the woman, and then he's there, he's like, look, I need to talk to this guy. You can't talk to him. Rips off the door. And he's doing this to save somebody's life. And I'm still at this point like, well, who is this guy he's trying to save? Why is he trying to do it? And the whole impetus is no, he needs to save this person because that's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And
there's nothing else. He's not like his parents were killed.
And the cops are
and he had this trauma for his entire life, and he's trying to regain his childhood. This guy just comes over and says, no, I have all of these abilities, and I got to do something to help people with them. And that's pretty much the thrust of the character from there. Then you bring in Lois, and it's really interesting how much of his foundation is started in that first issue and remains, throughout that first issue. That's one of the unique things about the character, that he, his sole motivation for doing it isn't some traumatic experience, isn't some mission that somebody gave him, isn't that, hey, take this ring and go do well, my son, or anything of that nature. It's just that, he takes it upon himself that I have these abilities and I'm going to do this stuff with it. It's not my top 5. I just think, I always think that Action Comics is, it's pretty much, that's like the low-hanging fruit. No disrespect, that's just the low-hanging fruit. And I try to bring in some, I usually try to bring in some, I don't know, I really love and respect that book, but it just doesn't make my top 5, even though without it there's no Superman.
So what are your next ones?
Well, I'm a big fan of Jeff Loeb's run, and the big magnum opus of his run was All Worlds at War. Now, Jeff Loeb may get some flack here and there, but I love Jeff Loeb's run. Jeff Loeb restored a lot of the grandeur, the power, and the possibilities with that power. It was like a manga Silver Age run. I mean, Superman was pushing planets again in Our Worlds at War. He takes the guy to the end.
But that's one of the problems.
He takes the guy to the end of time.
Jeff Loeb did some really big Kirby sort of thing. He really brought the whole team. They had a different team. It was Joe Kelly,
Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly, Joe Casey.
Joe Casey, and they really brought a lot of energy. Those books look really good. So.
And they needed to come in because the other team, to be honest, they were done. They had. Death of Superman would have been enough to take out any writing team, and they were done. Once you're doing stories about the death of Clark Kent, and Electric Superman, and it was just time to go.
So what's your third?
Well, All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman. The thing that really gets me is there's some guys out there, and I respect their opinion, but they don't like All-Star Superman. And I read the criticism they have of it, and they make some really good points. But that's just an awesome Superman book. It ties together so many things. It's a really big story. But the issue that really drew me in was All-Star Superman number 5, where and that's the only issue where Superboy, since you brought it up, that's the only issue where there's actually a Superboy in there, because he's still young and he's on the farm and he has to fight something and his dad is there. And throughout the story, there's this bandaged Superman, and they're like, okay, he's a Superman from the future. And it turns out the Superman from the future wasn't Superman from the future. That was Superman. Okay, he had bandaged himself because he's dying, and one of the last things he wanted to do was to see his father one more time before he died. And that just really got me here. And Superman's one of the few characters where you can do that, where you can be sentimental, You can show some compassion. And I was like, this is the most powerful man in the world. He's dying, and he's got this checklist, his bucket list of one of the things he's doing. But one of the things that he really wants to do is to go back and see his dad one more time. And I stopped and said, man, I mean, how many of us wouldn't love to do that? You know, just let me go back one more time, see my dad one more time, or this person one more time before I die.
I wonder how
And
Jarrell felt about that.
Jarrell is, I mean, look, I mean, it's difficult to square it. He can't go back to Krypton, because, you know, see him, because just
If he can go back to Earth, why can't he go back to Krypton?
because it doesn't work that way. It
Oh,
doesn't-
what? The yellow sun doesn't follow him throughout the universe?
No,
while
you
he's
can't go
in
back to a
air?
time period where you don't exist.
But he did exist in
Where you don't exist. He didn't exist when he was back then. Okay, by the time he exists, he's gone. You know, he can't be there.
It's a tough time.
And that actually worked. And so, but the whole idea is like, it drew into it because it was able to really encompass these larger themes, still do like some really wacky Silver Age stuff. And, you know, a lot of, again, guys are like, oh, I'm not really interested in the technical stuff. He shoots Lex Luthor with this gravity gun. And when he did that, I was like, yes, that's the Superman I'm waiting for. This is the guy who's, you know, it's not just about the muscles and everything of that nature, but he's thinking. All right, he's thinking. He saw the gravity gun, he shoots Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor had just gave himself Superman's powers. So he had the powers, and it looks like Superman's going to be defeated. He shoots Lex Luthor with the gravity gun. And once you have gravity, it speeds up time, because our time is based on gravity.
Right.
Okay, it's all the cycle that we go around the sun. We go around at 24 hours because of our center of gravity. If it was someplace like Jupiter, the days would be longer, shorter. So when he did that, he affected Lex Luthor's gravity. That speeds everything up, so Luthor loses his powers. And then in that one instance when he does have his powers, he's like, wow, I finally see the world like you do. I see how everything's connected and how we're all in this together. And then he loses the powers. And then he's like, hey, what happened? He's like, how'd I lose my powers? Superman's like, oh, you idiot. I took your powers away. Brain overgrown every time, and just takes him out. And that was something they had seeded in the very first issue, and he played it out. And I've always enjoyed that when writers do that. When they see this and they can follow this story through all the way, and it's very, very, very rewarding. But that is, I think once a decade you get a really great Superman story, and that was the great Superman story for the initial
90s?
millennium. That was the great Superman story.
So what about you?
Well, I'll only say what sort of pushed me away from it, and I was looking at it again, is like,
You can
so
walk on
Clark,
water?
you know, that Clark Kent sort of pushed to the side. Not that he's necessarily pushed to the side. Like early on, there's a moment with him and Lois, and they're talking, and he's just like, "Hey, I'm Superman." So, but from the point you're saying, there is, a lot of grandeur to All-Star Superman, and a lot, some of the aspects of Superman and all of like the dwarf star thing that's lying on the floor.
Yeah, the key made of a
Yeah, that thing. I was scared for Lois. Like, they didn't give a hernia even trying to pick something. Why would you try? And her getting afraid, that was kind of bothersome. But then how he played out that, it was a phony sort of thing that she got. She got scared and nothing comes of it.
So you agree with him?
I would want more Clark Kent. I thought they sort of played up the bumbling part, and that he was so huge. It's like, well, come on, he's like completely the way Frank Quitely was drawing him. It's like he's so immensely huge.
Well, he was doing like the big, thick country boy, that sort of stuff, and then Superman, of course, is going to be even bigger because he's slouching. But I mean, I'll be honest, it's not that far away from what Wayne Boring was doing on the comics in the 1950s, where Superman was this big, barrel-chested guy, and
Well,
that's really what they were
extrapolating. But
extrapolating.
you sort of, I don't think that they necessarily made it seem like Clark was that big. Yeah, Byrne sort of said, hey, Clark is big, but it seemed like, what's the name's Clark? I guess even, what was it? You're saying like, what's it, like the Superman for all seasons.
Yeah.
Where they sort of have a Clark like that. But even though Clark is huge, they sort of have, I don't know.
He's like that huge, like that Ox type of guy where he's big, but still almost like this innocuous type of big, or that, like, oh, that's just Big Jim. And Big Jim is so big, he's like the wall that nobody really pays attention to.
Big Jim makes into one of the best newspaper companies ever. So he's not that dumb. He's not just Big Jim.
No, but Big Jim doesn't have to mean that, that he's dumb or anything of that nature. But he's just like,
But you're
he's
making it
so
sound like
big.
he's a country hit.
He's just like this big, quiet guy. He's just innocuous, after a while. It's like you have these guys who,
I see
regardless
your
of their
point.
size, they're just innocuous because that's just their bearing and their personality.
So what's your
So I'm
next
gonna
one?
go to my number 2. My number 2 is one I had as a kid that was somehow in the house in between all these millions of Marvel comics and maybe some Legion of Superheroes.
And Batman comics, don't forget that.
And of course there was some Batman comics. But there was a issue, it was Superman 369, it's Superman's Last Christmas. But basically, and he's fighting the cover, Parasite's punching Superman into like they have their own tree in Metropolis that Superman puts up. So basically, Superman's there, and Clark Kent. It starts basically with Clark Kent sort of completely down on Christmas, and they don't say, it's like, "Oh, Clark, you're always such a Scrooge during this time." It's like, "Yeah, I did my shopping already." And then realizing, like, at that point, he didn't really have a family. He didn't have the Kents anymore, so he's like completely alone. But they hinted that later in the story, and then he's in this thing at the Fortress of Solitude where he's floating. And then Parasite somehow from somewhere just comes in there and attacks him. He's got him in this hold, and Superman is in his hold, he's draining his power, and then Superman just takes him, and he's like, I got just one burst of power, and he throws him into this like snow mountain, and like I said, and he's all weak, but now he's like, he has to get out of the Fortress of Solitude, and Parasite uses Superman's power to melt himself away, and say, I'll catch him next time. I got a perfect plan to take him out. So Clark is going around, and he realized he's being investigated. Like, I think Parasite has something where the sniper's about to hit him as Clark Kent, and then he's like, oh no, the person that they're trying to hit is me. I'm the one who's going to get hit. And the next thing you know, this person kicks him. He's like, kicks the guy who's going to shoot Clark Kent. And it's like, oh man, who's investigating me? And it hints to this other story that's going on. What's the name comes back, and Superman does this trick to stop Parasite. And it leads to this little family aspect of a person that the Kents had before Clark, that they took in the border, that was a troubled kid. And this guy turned his life around and became like this government agent and never connected to the Kents anymore. And that's why he was looking for Clark Kent. I was like, wow, I remember that thing in the house for so many times that I'd forgotten the story. And then I read it again. I was like, wow, it had a lot of Clark Kent in it. It was a pre-crisis. But it was still an enjoyable story. And he hinted that, like he had this personality, Clark Kent had this personality that the people that he worked with already knew. Like he was just a normal guy to them. So that one is a good one. And then let's go to the mother of all Superman stories, Superman versus Muhammad Ali. It is the most visual representation at the time of Superman, of almost Superman the movie before the movie.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big things I loved about that is that
Why don't we just talk about the Super Friends?
No.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we just
Have
talk
you
about
read that? Did you read Superman?
I didn't read it, but I saw the cover and I said, this is a joke.
No, you got to read it. You have to read it. That is some of the best art out of the Bronze Age for Superman.
Yes.
And the biggest thing is that Neil Adams did it. Neil Adams almost did no Superman stories at all.
Covers, but
he did all of these covers, and I would always go and flip through the cover, and I'm like, okay, it's Kurt Swan. No problem with Kurt Swan, but I was like, the cover is what got me in there.
Right.
And I would go and it's like, okay, he's doing Batman. One of these days he's going to do Superman.
Yeah.
No, didn't happen. Didn't happen. And then they came out the Treasury edition. I was like, okay, maybe that's it. No, this is Dick Giordano. I was like, I'm never going to see it. And then you go over here, and it's not just how he renders Superman, but also his rendering of Muhammad Ali. It's a really tight. The art
I didn't
is,
read the
the
story,
art is beautiful.
and I didn't think the story would be.
Look, the story is not. The story is. I mean, Denny O'Neil wrote
It's
the
like
story.
having the
and to be honest, the story isn't.
Globetrotters in the comic book.
Well,
No, that would have been a joke. Superman meeting the Harlem Globetrotters with the giant guy with the hair reaching in and pulling out stuff, that would have been a joke. But this one, because Ali was actually, he had some input into it. And you can see how that comes across with it. And it's a light story. Okay, it's a light story, but there were still some things in there that were really imaginative and creative. Superman has to box Ali, okay, and he's like, well, look, he's like, look, I'm going to kill you, Ali, and Ali's like, well, no, I'm the champ, and I'm going to whoop you, so on and so forth. So he's full of ego the entire time. Superman says, look, you need to train me to box. So he takes him to the Fortress of Solitude, and he put up this red solar panel, a red solar light. So he's just a regular guy now. But he also puts up this other device. So it takes them out of time. So they actually spend almost 3 months together, so Superman actually gets time to learn. And then the guys come looking for him and say, hey, you're cheating. You got to come back over here and fight now. And they go, and the whole boxing match fights. Superman loses the boxing match. and then you see them being taken out.
Well, that's the toughest image as a kid, besides Kirby's New Gods, seeing, Superman taking this pounding, and then next thing you know, the defeat of him actually being carried out. That is one of the as a kid, one of the toughest images ever. See, you would have liked it.
Only it was a trick. Because later on, you see somebody take off a mask, and you think it's Muhammad Ali, but who is it? It's Superman.
Yeah.
And you get to see that's when you get to see how beat up and banged up he was and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay? Then Superman, you see him actually doing stuff without his powers.
Yes.
Of course they had to do the internal monologue. Oh, this is so difficult. They're like, just do it, man.
You had that's
Just
the
do it,
Hamlet
man.
part you have to respect. You have to have the internal monologue. It's comic
They're
book.
like, oh man, this is more difficult than if I ever had my powers. Just do it. You're not Wolverine. Stop
it's
moaning.
fun.
Just do it. But he comes. They both save the day at the end of the day. Ali has to go and fight this really giant alien,
Yes.
and they're like, hey man, this is it. Your planet's gonna be destroyed. And Ali's like, no, it's not gonna be destroyed because I can still do one thing. He's like, what? I can whoop him.
Yeah.
And he
It was a close up. I can whoop.
And then at the end of the day, Ali sorts out that Superman is actually Clark Kent. It's cool.
That part I wasn't cool with.
They shake
That
hands like,
part.
we are the
The
greatest.
shot of them shaking hands.
It's
was really good.
it's the art on that. They took the art seriously. And the thing is, they knew how to market the character better at that time. They're like, hey, look, what's really hot right now? Muhammad Ali. Let's put him with Superman, and it worked.
Well, I
it
think back
sold
then it
well.
was a little different. There were far less characters that they had to compete against.
It was
now.
creative. It was creative. It was not, and it was unabashed.
Was it creative? I mean,
unashamed.
back then they were doing things with other tie-ins. Again,
No, that period they were doing.
I'm talking about marketing Superman. I'm talking about a character now where he has not had an animated series in over 20 years. Okay, his films come out,
probably
and
there's just no demand for it. You ever thought of that?
hey, if there's no demand for it, it's because you're not providing it. You're telling me kids are not going to be into a character like Superman if you put out an animated series?
Well, they do the animated series of Batman, get hits. They do the animated series of Teen Titans. There's a hit.
And they did the animated series of Superman. That was a hit. And then they
When?
went straight to Justice. What do you mean? The Superman animated series, that was a solid rating.
When was that?
That ended in 1996.
Exactly. Look at how far back that was. That's my point.
No,
You know, if it was-
nice
if it was
try.
successful,
Nice
if it was
try.
successful, it would have kept on going.
No, then they got on the whole bat wank because they realized, hey, look, this is where the money is. We're just going to keep churning this out. Marvel does the same thing, but the same characters always get shows. Spider-Man is a draw. Spider-Man always has a show. The X-Men always have a show. The Hulk comes and goes, but he usually gets a show or something of that nature. And who's the other one? They have
Punisher?
No, not the Punisher.
They've had, like, what,
Oh,
3
right now
movies
they
of
have the
those.
Avengers, and the Avengers will come out. That's their go-to team.
Yeah, but
DC.
that's just right now. I mean, we
No,
talking about.
Marvel markets their characters. DC comes out and says, hey, look, who's good? Batman. Batman always has a show. You may give somebody else a show, but Batman will always have a show, and that's why nobody knows the other guys. But come on, if you have Superman, this character's been around for 70 some odd years, and you're telling me you can't do a show with him, they can't get a video game up off the ground with this guy that actually works.
Well, the Atari one was so bad. that they did, so.
Yeah, it was bad. You got to keep trying.
you
It's
gotta keep
look,
doing
if Warner Brothers came and said, you know what, this is ridiculous. I want a Superman video game, and I want a good one, and I want it by next year, they would do it.
Yeah.
But nobody's asking for it because Arkham Knight sells.
Very well.
Nobody's asking for it until it stops selling. And then it becomes, what do we do now? Eventually, that's what happens. These
Well, they
things
have
stop
Injustice
selling.
Gods Among Us.
It's Mortal Kombat.
We know what it is, but I'm
It's
just
not
saying.
it's not a Superman game. But anyway, you didn't chime in. What's yours?
Again, I'll go back to the death of Superman. The best one there.
Wow.
You know, I mean,
Now you're just going page by page. This is my
Oh,
favorite
man.
page. And he's dying. And
No, he's
then-
going like he's like
actually-
he's going pixel by pixel. He's like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
this,
actually, you know
this is
what?
the red with
when
the
I
blood.
would say Superman, Superboy, I did like the characterization of Superboy in the Legion of Superhero. The fact that he had this whole backstory that he didn't know about, and I thought, to me, that was one of the better stories about Superman that I read.
Which one?
It wasn't one, just the overall. what he
Just the
thought-
Legion. him
Just the
and
Legion and how he dealt with his relationship there. I thought that was pretty interesting. Here you have everybody's around. This guy's from the past. They know how powerful he is. They know his whole history, but he doesn't know. And yet, when he does find out, he's trying to make himself be himself. Not living up to this huge legend. So that's the one Superman, quote unquote, character that I kind of like. That whole story dealing with Superman and him dealing with the Legion. You know.
I gotta read that one. That one I haven't read. But I'm going back and collecting all the Bronze Age Superman stories, getting one nice large collection. That's when it was really good. It was top. All right, so I'm up. I'll get my number 2, and that is DC Comics Presents 29. Superman meets the Spectre, or rather, Superman and the Spectre. Previously, in our last episode of DC Comics Presents, Supergirl had been knocked out and was flying at breakneck speed through space, so fast that Superman lost her, and now he was flying just as fast in order to catch up to her. He flies so fast, he breaks the bonds of eternity. It was Jim Starlin's story, and the whole setup is to show how immensely powerful Superman is, until finally he hits something, and it's the Spectre. The Spectre tells him, and of course I'm going to ham it up, the Spectre tells him, Superman, you can't go any further. You'll see things that you're not going to see. Which I thought, well, wow, what's he going to see? He just broke the bonds of eternity. You know, what more is there? So he's like, look, you can't go any further. You can't see. And Superman's like, look, my cousin's out there. I'm going to do what the hell is necessary. Channeling that whole Golden Age thing. Look, man, I got stuff to do, okay? Right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. And the Spectre's like, no, you need to settle down. This isn't going to happen. Superman tries to outrun him. Nope, that's not going to happen. Tries to fight with him. No, it's not going to happen. Spectre ends up doing one of these freaky things, picking him up, dropping him inside. Superman gets to see this whole psychedelic thing going on in the Spectre's belly. And then at the whole end of the day, Spectre's like, look, man, I'm willing to help you out, but you never asked me to help you out. You were just like, you had to do this yourself. He's like, if you want Supergirl, here she is right over here. And that, I think for some readers, they may not have cared for it because it was humbling. But for me, it just was a reminder that even a character like Superman has limits. Okay, and for me, that was like a really cool way to show it, that there's still something more powerful than Superman. Okay, so one, they showed you just how fast, how powerful this particular character is.
A cosmic entity.
Okay, and then two, then you throw the Spectre on top, of it. Okay, and it was like a slight morality play with, hey, look, sometimes, I mean, and that it didn't necessarily have to go that way. But then, of course, you get Jim Starlin on, and these guys always do a little bit of the Marvel effect where these guys got to fight before they can get to it, because he could have just asked to begin with, and he's smart enough to do the stuff. But it was, for me, anytime a guy says, oh, no, Superman's too powerful, we can't do this stuff, I was like, well, if you can't write stories with Superman, how do you do the Spectre or Mixoplick or anything of that nature? It's up to you as the writer to be creative. Not depower these guys, okay? But you could easily put them up against somebody who's immensely more powerful than like the Spectre if you wanted to. And now it's your job as a writer to say, okay, how does he confront this, overcome this, and still do this at the end of the day? Stop being lazy, write some good stories.
I kind of disagree with you there because, you're looking at a character that has so much immense power. I mean, again, godlike. Even though he's only in the yellow sun, somehow he survives in areas where there's no yellow sun. You guys can do the analysis on that.
He soaks up the radiation. The radiation is everywhere, man. It's not the light.
The yellow radiation alone?
It's not yellow radiation.
The yellow radiation.
The sun's radiation permeates the entire solar system. You understand that, right?
But they're red suns.
All right.
You know what I'm saying? All right, go. We gotta wrap this up.
We don't have to wrap it up. We were talking about the greatest Superman stories ever. So I would just say the end point that you were saying, that the Jim Starlin issues of DC Comics Presents were very entertaining. Only problem is sort of the Superman sort of punching first.
Yeah.
But the image of him hitting the Spectre was amazing. But then him trying to punch the Spectre later is like, oh, okay. He has that aspect of, oh, I'm going to hit first because, nothing can stop me. And then all through the run, he gets his, he has to, feel the effects of not thinking first, which is not necessarily how, but it was very visual run that he did. It was a lot of fun in there.
I think it worked for that issue. Once you start playing it out after a bit, it's like it can get a little tired. But I also just love that run because he introduced Mongol, and between Starlin and Moore, those are the only two guys who seem to write that character to the extent and the effect that he could really have. Mongol was this guy who was a match for Superman on just about every level, and Moore took it to someplace else because he really just strategized and said, look, I need to take this guy out, and I'm not going to take him out hand-to-hand or anything. I'll take him out with a gift or something of that nature, trap him in his own dream, which was pretty good. And no, that will not be on the top 5. For the man who has everything, will not be on the top 5, so, but so that's all you get of it. But I love the way that they did Mongol. He's still one of my favorite villains, even though he's just become a stock villain now. It's like, let's throw a villain in there, Mongol. Mongol's going to come in there, hey, Superman beats him, okay, take Mongol out. We'll see if we get in here.
Lex Luthor, who's a human being?
He's one of my favorites. I didn't say he's better. Right. I just said he's one of my favorites
so
because of those stories, but they've never maximized his potential, unfortunately. He's just never been maximized.
What's your last one?
Oh, well, we got 5. I got,
I could have heard like 4 or 5. You agreed with him like 2 times, so I figured I'm throwing that number in.
They were good stories. And, Astrid would just going back and forth on it.
Yeah, it's not like you're doing anything. You took over the show. You say, I'm the moderator.
Oh, I'm not taking motion. Okay, thanks.
So,
Well, I guess
yeah.
this you get the last time, and we have to wrap it up.
To wrap it up, well, I had to throw in the burn one. The Mummy Strikes.
What type of Superman stories are you guys talking about?
Basically, it's a story where he goes to work. He isn't ready. He sort of got scuff. He hasn't shaved. He goes to work, finds out that Lois is in trouble over in Mexico, and they find this and unearth this thing where it's this, like this culture that they hadn't seen before. Superman comes over there as Clark Kent, and then Lois thinks he's going to steal the story from him. It's like, no, I'll just be there as I'm not doing anything. And then they start something. This mummy comes out, and what's the name? They're basically running from him, but Superman's like, as Clark Kent's trying to figure a way to fight the mummy and get rid of them, so he sort of pushes Lois a little further, and then they're separating. So Superman's fighting this mummy as Clark Kent. He has the Clark Kent outfit on, and he doesn't have the outfit, and they're just tossing each other around. And Superman decides, I need to stop this, but maybe trying to pull out what they did to start it. Let me pull that out, and it causes a big explosion, and he's knocked out. And then the explosion allows them to go find him. It opens up a hole, so Lois goes in, and he doesn't have the glasses on, but he's just all messed up and beat up. And it's like, Clark, you're here. And then you don't know what happened. Like, what happened to the mummy? And you see this robot that's on the side, and that's how it ends. That's the cliffhanger to the next issue.
Wow.
It's such a good, interesting thing of showing Clark Kent, like doing interesting stuff with Clark Kent.
Just by himself.
And for myself, Action Comics 775. What's so funny about Truth, Justice, and the American Way? The first appearance of the Elite, Superman versus the Elite. That, for me, again, was one of these pivotal Superman stories that came along at the right time, where people were like, Superman this, Superman that. And the Elite were pretty much the authority. That's who they were designed after.
Yeah.
And, I'm still like, I forgot, I think I was right out of university, but old enough where you're not supposed to be sucked into a comic and be concerned about the character. And I was really concerned about Superman. It's like, I don't think you can make it out of this dude. And even his dad's like, I don't think you can beat him. His wife is like, I don't think you can beat him. And then he goes and he fights them, and he looks like he's losing. And then you have to remember, no, this guy has these particular abilities. The only problem I have with it is, especially now, is like I thought the theme was kind of lost a little bit because he has to pretty much do what they do in order to get his point across.
So, Cal,
but
we
I
have to
think
cut you off here because we have to continue this at another time. This is part 1. Please come back to part 2, to the Fortress of Solitude, and Cal will get more
This is
into
the
the
last
details.
time you're coming here. Cut me off on my own show. So Action Comics
our top
775. It was a really good issue.
Our top 4.
And thank you for having me, Cal. I appreciate the time.
Get out, man. Just get out.
Petey?
You you ruined everything,
Just get
taking
out.
away our momentum.
Always ruin everything.